I think the biggest step first is to really examine your standards and know what you're teaching and why, and communicate that to your students. Whether it's chemistry or welding or physical education or English or math or science, to really look at the standards. Are you Common Core? Are you state frameworks? And then explain to the kids what they have to know and why. And if the reason is you need to learn this because it's on the standards, that is not a good enough reason. You have to have enough passion in your content and what you're teaching to help them to see that nothing that they learn is totally pointless. So the Common Core changed the game. And I fully support it in every way, shape, and form, because I think that it's about time that kids had an opportunity to learn what they were supposed to learn. And when I did my dissertation like 5 years ago, there was a study that I read that like blew my mind. And I don't know if anyone remembers the Jean Anion study done 30 years ago, where she did research into these schools and she called them working class schools and elite schools. So you're looking at schools that serve predominantly, you know, like low income, high minority, you know, high dropout rates, and then schools that are like these really entitled schools, you know, where all parents have, you know, these advanced degrees and the kids are going to do well. And she was trying to see, well, what's so different about these schools? And she realized it wasn't so much the curriculum, but it was the way that it was delivered. In the working class schools, the kids had no right to know what they were learning. No right at all. They couldn't question it. It was, you will do this now, you will do it like this. And what they were being prepared for was a working class life where they learned to follow rules. And that was it. They weren't allowed to think. They weren't allowed to question why this is important. It was like, I told you you're going to do it, you're going to sit down, and you're going to do it. Whereas in these elite schools, the teachers are going, okay, this is the standard, this is why we're going to use it. Can someone repeat it to me? Why is this going to be helpful for us? Okay, let's sit as a group and talk about all the different ways this can benefit us. And kids were allowed to question it and say, well, I don't really think that it makes sense to learn it that way. Can't we do this? And the teacher would go, oh, well, that's a really good idea. And these people, when they tracked them decades out, were becoming CEOs and inventors because they were told at a very young age, you do have a right to question this. This is your, you know, this is your freedom as a child to be able to learn. And so they found that in these elite schools, kids were given the why. They were able to understand why they were doing what they were doing. And at the working class schools, it was basically they had to follow these rules and instructions. So they were setting them up for actually different lives. And the Common Core, because they're so transparent, now allows teachers across the country or parents or students across the country to say, wait a second, this is what I'm supposed to be learning. And a part of UDL is really heightening the salience of those goals and objectives and actually sharing those objectives with kids. So saying, this is the standards that I am required to teach you this year, and spending time at the beginning of the year and saying, this is your right at the end of the year to be exposed to this. Hold me to it. Now, the thing that teachers have to understand, though, is there really are two types of standards, and they lend themselves to very different UDL strategies. So you have content standards, and that's what do the kids have to know? Photosynthesis, American Revolution, simile. They don't actually have to do anything with that specifically, they just have to know it like it needs to be in their heads. But then we have these performance standards. We have to teach kids to speak, we have to teach kids to write, we have to teach kids to read. You know, in math, they have to solve equations. They have to learn how to follow the scientific method in science. And if you look on page 9, I basically went through and took Common Core standards and then the math state frameworks for every subject for elementary and secondary. And if you look at the subject you're most familiar with, you'll see the difference. So for example, we're just going to look down at, you know, English language arts and reading on page 9. The difference between describe characters, setting, and major events in a story using key details and write opinion pieces on topics or texts supporting a point of view with reasons are very different. And a lot of the times teachers combine them. So when I'm teaching about what is setting, what is characters, can you describe them? Kids don't have to write. And that's, I think, what a lot of people fall back on, is they say kids have to write everything, they have to read everything. This is where the choice comes in. If I just want to know if they can describe characters or setting, why can't they do it in a rap? Why can't they do it in a poster, or a video, or a comic, or a diorama? Okay? If they can show me they understand characters, they have met that standard. And I can say, this student is proficient at this standard. Now that I know that they know what characters and setting and major events are, then if I want to, I can move towards, now how do I scaffold how to write an opinion piece? But if you combine them, and they don't know the content, they have failed because now it's not correct. So you have to make sure you pre-teach content. And so when you're thinking about content standards, it's really awesome to give kids a ton of options of how they're gonna learn. Okay, you wanna know about the American Revolution? You wanna know about photosynthesis? Okay, over here in this corner of the classroom, I have a computer screen, you can go watch a video. Or I have a bunch of books from the library over here, why don't you come over and you can read these? Or if anyone wants a mini lecture from me, I'm gonna sit over here and you can talk to me. But by the end of the period, you need to be able to answer these questions about this content. Okay, so these choices should be able to engage them or challenge them. And then you also want to give them choices on how they demonstrate their learning. So you say things like, okay, at the end of the period, you need to answer these questions, but it can be in a poster or a skit or a rap or a Voki online. If you have iPads in your room, if you have a couple student computers, you can give some kids the option of Prezi or PowerPoint, but they don't always have to write it. Okay, so you're going to provide very flexible ways of presenting lesson content, something they can listen to, something they can read, and then some sort of image. Flexible options for student engagement, saying, I'm just going to split the three things apart. You choose which one you want. And I would do this all the time, even with, I've taught 7th grade for the past 9 years, and you would assume that I'll choose the same thing, and they just don't. So I'd say, okay, we're going to read these 5 pages, we're going to do close reading, and we need to make sure we pull out all the aspects of setting. Okay, so you can sit with me at this table, I'll read it out loud, I'll model it, you can do it that way. You can go to the library and read it alone, or you can go listen to it on the audio. And I was always amazed that it was like split in thirds. Because I'd just want to sit with the teacher and kind of hear it modeled so I could go home and do it myself. And they just choose different things. When you're talking about methods though, your hands are tied a little bit. You have to teach them to write well. You have to teach them to read. So what you have to do for them is you have to provide enough scaffolding and enough work samples for every single step of the process to give them a fighting chance. And scaffolding is about releasing your responsibility. So at first, you're literally giving them everything. You might even write an essay with some sentences missing and say, okay, complete it. Or you might write an essay where you've left out transitions. Or you might do 5 math problems and then say, do the 6th one. And it seems like, why would I do all that? That's how they have to learn. The next time you provide less and less and less. But you have to break up that process really, really specifically. When you're looking at what you have to teach, there's things that you have to teach kids that are just knowledge-based. It's content. You need to learn about the American Revolution. You have to know about photosynthesis. You have to be able to name the elements. You have to know, the causes of World War II. That does not have to be done with reading and writing. That can be done in videos. It could be done by making posters. It could be from researching on their iPhones. But giving kids an opportunity to learn this content in a way that's flexible, to show you they understand the content without having to sit down all the time to take a multiple choice test or to write some lengthy composition, but to just say, I just need to know that you know this, that you understand this. That's your content. Then we all have methods. These are solving algebraic equations or using physics formulas or having these long science lab reports. That has to be done in a certain order. You don't have a choice. You have to be able to read, you have to be able to write. So breaking that up in really concrete steps and not confusing it with the content. So don't teach American Revolution while you're teaching how to, write and cite a primary source. You want to teach the actual strategy separate from the content. And then when you bring them together, then they have a comfort level with both of them so they can actually, show you what you're looking for, because you have to always ask yourself, what am I trying to measure? I am looking for proficiency with what? If I'm looking for proficiency with this student can explain, photosynthesis, or this student can explain the water cycle. If that's the method, then you don't need it in a paper. But if you have to make sure they can write, informational text, then you need to show them, what does that mean? What does organization look like? What is voice? What are proper language conventions? And make that really, really obvious. So how are these standards different for kids? So let's just think about a content standard where you have all of these choices. So think of a content standard for a spouse or a parent or a child or a friend. Now, make sure the methods are not embedded because we're thinking about knowledge here. So if I said, I want my husband to learn ways to help me relax after a long day with the kids, I am not telling him any specific steps he has to follow. I'm saying, hey, honey, I would love for you to help me relax. So on his own, He can go think of something on his own. He could go read something. He'd probably read it on his iPhone because that's his thing. But he can come up with his own way of learning this, and I'm sure he could do it. And then he could actually implement this. Whereas if I said to him, you will massage my shoulders every night for 15 minutes using the kneading technique, coconut oil, and jasmine candles, you can imagine the pushback. And that is what school is like for some kids. When they walk into your classroom and you say, this is what we are doing. This is a US history. We use black pen. We write in cursive. We never write on the back of pages. If you do not put your name and date on the paper, it will be 10% off. If you do not cut the sides off the paper, it will be 10% off. What are you really trying to measure? The only thing that is our job is to measure content standards and method standards, not, what color pen something is written in, not whether or not a child rips off the edge of a paper. So it's really thinking about, where can I give up some of the control to let kids explore things in a way that they want, and you're getting the same result? Because my husband might say, oh, I have a great idea. I'm going to take the kids to the pool club, and I'm going to play with them, and she can stay home and read. Isn't that really, that's meeting my goal. But I have to give up something. And when you're always combining your content with your methods for every single assignment, the kids feel like they can't even move. And they don't get to learn about how they learn, or different ways that are helpful for them. And when then they go off to college and their careers, they're mind blown because they don't know how to learn on their own. They're like, okay, professor, you just tell me how you do this. How many words on this line, please? How many of us have had kids ask that? How many lines does this have to be? I don't know, just write the letter. I mean, do I indent it 1 thumb or 2? I don't know. Like, can I write on the back of the paper? And you're like, does this really matter in real life? No. So we need to teach kids to learn the standards and not bring in all these extra things.